Hello, everybody. We're back. We're back. This is the last session today for the Black Women Photographer Summit, but no worries, we will be back tomorrow. For this session, I'm super excited because we have an amazing resident MD and photographer here with us. Um, I'm so sorry, I forgot how to pronounce your name again. Is it Ade?
Yeah, Ade, Osinubi.
Ade, thank you so much. Thank you for coming to be here with us. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited.
Absolutely. I think you might be our first ever doctor with Black Women
Ooh,
Photographers Summit.
okay.
I'm gonna say I really love that because we do it all.
Yeah.
Um, so can we dive right in there? Can you tell us about your journey as a doctor and then transitioning into your creative career?
Yeah, of course. So I am currently about to be a third year resident physician in emergency medicine. I'm currently working in Philadelphia currently. So for me, my journey into medicine started young. I knew I wanted to be a physician from a very young age. At about 5 years old. My mom's also a doctor, so naturally I wanted to be exactly like her and do exactly what she did. So I was able to get a early exposure to medicine. My journey into creativity, the creative field, really started in high school. And that was my first introduction to documentary film. So when I was going into my junior year of high school, a friend of and I went to northern Ethiopia, Mekelle, Ethiopia, to film a documentary about a medical condition called obstetric fistula. And for those of you who don't know, obstetric fistula is a injury that can happen when women or birthing people are in prolonged labor and don't necessarily have access to skilled obstetric care. It happens here in the United States, but it's typically surgically repaired very quickly. But in folks in lower resource settings, those fistulas are not repaired, and it can cause people to leak their urine and waste. And unfortunately, they can become stigmatized from their communities. And so, my friend and I created this documentary to raise more awareness about obstetric fistula and actually a rehabilitation center in northern Ethiopia that was working on reintegrating these women back into society. And from that experience, I saw just, how the intersection of film, media can be used to advance health awareness as well as health equity. And so that's kind of how I've been able to blend both of those interests. And we can talk about this a little bit later. But when I was a first year medical student, I started working on my documentary, Black Motherhood Through the Lens, which is about four Black women's experiences in navigating the reproductive healthcare system. So that's kind of where that all came to be. So my background is in documentary film and also photography as well.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna get into this film, Black Motherhood. But starting off, you were 16, you said, right? Co-producing a whole documentary.
Yes, I was 16 years old. Luckily, we had a lot of help. The woman who we were volunteering with, her name is Alison Shigo. She's actually won an Emmy Award for some work she did on a previous documentary. So she had some experience in that area, not necessarily as much, the true like production, filming, editing. So
Yeah.
she was able to connect us with an editor in Ethiopia who actually taught us how to edit on Final Cut Pro. And so that's kind of how that started.
Wow, amazing. So then already at 16, this creative interest was sparked. Were you also doing camera operating or was that your partner at the time?
Yeah, so at the time, my friend was the one who was very much into videography and cinematography. So she was
Okay.
operating the camera. I was more so, helping with interviewing the women, helping with editing. And it wasn't until medical school when I kind of transitioned from photography to true film. I had done some like smaller film projects in the past, so I kind of knew how to work the camera and stuff, but it was only until medical school where I really delved into that.
Okay, amazing. So then let's go to this. You decided to hone in on combining your experience as a doctor with your love for storytelling. How do you go about taking on like such complex stories like this one and telling that through film?
That's a
Like what?
good question. Yeah. So I think I like to say this because I think that these experiences, my experience in Ethiopia and then my experience creating a documentary film about Black motherhood and, infertility, postpartum and and mood disorders, I think that has really helped me become a better physician because I learned how to, ask questions in a way that I feel like we can build that one-on-one connection. It also really was a good lesson in empathy. I thought, I feel like I was an empathetic person before, but I think it really took that to another level because in my day-to-day practice in the emergency department, I go to a room or a hallway bed because, the emergency departments can get very, very full quickly. And, we
Right.
only have about 5 to 10 minutes to spend with each other. But I think those experiences have helped me connect with patients in a way that I don't think I would have been able to do before. And so I think all of these experiences have culminated in, being able to connect with people. And in addition to photography and film, I also write. And so I oftentimes, my writing is about health and health equity, but I like to focus on people's experiences. And so, that has been really, monumental in helping me connect with people.
Yeah. I'm also wondering then, how do you make these stories accessible? Like you mentioned, not everybody knows about certain disorders and diseases. How do you make this accessible to those who might not be familiar with it and also make it important to them too?
Yeah, so that's a big reason why got into writing more. I've written, a little bit here and there. High school English very much prepared me, although it was challenging. But I think that my interest in writing was fueled to the fact that a lot of medical writing is very much in medical journals, which are very hard to access, first of all, via language, and then also cost, right? You have to have, access to these journals. And even myself, who has been through 4 years of medical school, 4 years of undergrad, I don't even find those journals very accessible. So that was why I wanted to go more into writing because I wanted to write for, lay press publications such as Teen Vogue, Essence, because those are typically free. It very much caters to folks from different educational backgrounds, and there are not those barriers. And so I know a lot of this is very much photography focused, but I would be remiss not to talk about how writing has allowed me to make this information more accessible to the masses.
Yeah, I also saw like you wrote for, was it the Washington Post and Glamour magazine on health equity, right?
Yes.
Nice. Can you tell us how somebody gets into writing about health equity?
That's a great question as well. I really feel like this was very much a divine connection for me because I don't come from a journalism background at all. I majored in public health, and back in 2021, I decided that I wanted to write about these health topics for the lay press. There are physicians out there that are like columnists for the New York Times and the Washington Post, which was something that was super interesting to me. But again, it was like, how do I even break into this? And so for me, it was very much just shooting my shot. Doing a little bit of investigation, discovery, figuring out who the editors are for the columns that you want to write with. So, going on Twitter and seeing who was a health editor for Glamour. And there was actually one woman who is now a resident, but she was a medical student at the time. She had written a piece for Glamour. And I asked her, how was she able to do this? And she was able to give me information. And that's how that first Glamour piece came about. And so for all the other pieces that I've written, it's really just been cold pitches and people being interested, which I feel very blessed by because I know it's just really not easy at all. So that's kind of how that has come to be.
Yeah, and okay, so like you mentioned, a lot of photographers and creatives don't think really about writing as a skill that they need to have. They focus on their visual skills. But you just shared like some of the many benefits of writing. How did you get better as a writer? Is there certain practices that you took?
Yeah, I think for me, it's still a work in progress, right? I think I do have some, natural inclination to writing. I've been told that, but I don't view myself as a true writer because I know there's people who will just sit and free write or, they're always reading, they're always just preparing like another piece. And that's really not me. For me, it's like, okay, this topic is something that's interesting to me. So the most recent piece I wrote about was about earlier rates of breast cancer and then Black women being disproportionately impacted by that. And it was profiling a Black woman who I'd actually come across on social media who's was diagnosed with breast cancer at 26. And so that was something that, again, very much a challenging patient experience that she's, going through. But that was something that kind of got my wheels turning because these are narratives that are not necessarily out there. And so for me, it's really like the stories that drive this interest and passion for writing. I don't think I can write about things that I'm not necessarily as interested in because I'm not necessarily like a journalist. So for me, it's really just like the passion for health equity that I have, and then the passion that I have for, elevating the voices of Black women, Black birthing people, etc.
I love when I get to speak with multi-hyphenate creatives like you because we get to see that like you can commit to all of your interests. Like you clearly, like you said, had a love for being a physician at a very young age, but you have this interest in writing and in documentary and in photography and like still being able to pursue that, I think is super important. Um, yeah, and with that being said, I want to pull up Black motherhood through the lens. I want to show everybody this website. It's so beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Let's talk about it a little bit. I know you produced and directed it. How did it come to be?
When I started medical school back in 2018, there was a lot of media attention about the Black maternal mortality crisis, which obviously hit close to home. As a Black woman myself, as someone who's been passionate about women's health, this was something that I wanted to address in my own way. While there was a lot of media attention about the Black maternal mortality crisis, there was not as much media attention about other disparities that Black women face along the continuum of reproductive healthcare, such as infertility, postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, et cetera. And so I wanted to create something that obviously it's not going to tackle everything, right? It's just not possible. But I wanted to create something that would also give voices to those issues as well. And so I was doing a scholarly concentration project in medical school. I went to Brown for medical school, and there was a track called Physician as Communicator. And so that's very much the intersection of health and media. And so that was a really nice launching pad to creating this film. And I had a very supportive film mentor, Dr. Teresa Schrader, who did a lot of writing and journalism work within medicine. And she has been just like the biggest cheerleader for me in this film and was so supportive. So it was really great to have that backing. And I got a lot of backing from Brown too, both financially and also through mentorship. And I started filming the summer of 2019 into the fall of 2019. I was able to film actually the like 75% of the film. Then I was studying for board exams, and then the pandemic hit, and so that kind of threw a wrench in things. And then I was able to finish up filming and mainly production of the film in the fall or winter of 2020. And throughout that time, I was editing here and there, and then I really finished editing during my last year of medical school, which was in like 2021, 2022.
Incredible. Like you're balancing so many different things, and then to think that it's like happening at the same time as the pandemic, like this is crazy.
It was definitely a lot, yeah.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about those challenges that you faced during this time of just like getting it out there and finishing it?
Yes. So, oddly enough, when I started off the process, I thought the most challenging part would be finding the people in the film. And luckily, it was not challenging. Again, I like to say that very much was divinely connected to each one of the women in the film, because it's a lot to put yourself out there for someone you really don't know. The only person I kind of knew before that I knew beforehand was Dr. Jo McCullough, because I used to take her pictures for her blog. But the other women I kind of was connected to in either activist spaces or through a physician mentor that I knew, or also Facebook/social media. And so that was actually kind of the easier part. I think the harder part was, especially with the pandemic, before I was in the women's houses and, filming their morning routine and all of those things. But with the pandemic, it presented a new challenge because I was like, again, who would want me in their house with my camera? I'm a medical student in clinical rotation, so I'm rotating in the hospital. I'm being exposed to COVID. But luckily, Jamie, she's the last person I filmed, and she was the one that I filmed in the middle of the pandemic. Was very much graceful. I took a COVID test before filming, and we got all the filming done in one weekend. to avoid like all that exposure. So COVID definitely was a challenge. I would say balancing it with the medical school schedule wasn't as bad because I was able to compartmentalize, right? Like, so when I was studying for our board, so like step one and step two, I wasn't focused on the film, but during my second year of medical school, I attended all of my classes virtually pre-pandemic, actually. And so I was able to film during those times. And then lastly, I would say just other challenges is just like, doing this on a very small budget. I had like a 3,000 production budget, which is very, very negligible. But I was able to pull that off. And then I would say lastly, again, I was really a crew of one. That was intentional because A, I didn't have money to really pay anyone. And B, just with my schedule, trying to align schedules with other people and also the women could have presented other challenges. And so I was the videographer, the audio person, the editor, etc., which I think was good for this type of project because I feel like just being one person in the room really helped, foster that connection and allowing women to be more comfortable. But then obviously it's challenging because again, I'm no like professional at the end of the day. A lot of it was kind of trial and error. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's some moments of bittersweetness in that where it's like you are doing a lot of trial and error and you're like learning as you go, but you're also giving these women an opportunity to feel safe and vulnerable with you, while you have to wear all these hats. Like that's a lot of time management, mental compartmentalization. Like you were managing a lot and it's like really impressive.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, but you also mentioned budget, and I know that's one big thing that folks always talk about. I feel like it's a question we get a lot in some of our classes. Could you tell us or like maybe give tips about how to make a film on a budget? Um, you did say you got help with funding, but like even if some of it is self-funded, like can you talk about layers in that?
Yeah, so I already had like a DSLR before. I had like a Canon 6D, but then I sold that to get my 6D Mark One or whichever one that has like a touchscreen, or I forgot. Yeah. Yeah, 6D Mark Two, that has a touchscreen. So it made it easier for me to like focus on things. So I sold that body for another one. So I didn't have to necessarily pay as much for a new camera body, maybe like another $500. Um, Lighting equipment, I got off Amazon. And then another thing that was expensive was buying a gimbal because again, I have very shaky hands and just like the key of having like a really nice smooth documentary is to have a good camera stabilizer. So that was about like $500 to $600 or so. And then the other thing was just like the external mic and the lavalier to like um, record the sound externally, which is always better. Luckily, I already had Final Cut Pro, so I didn't have to pay for that. I already had my Mac that I was like already using and stuff. So the really main costs were just like, the new camera body, some of the new equipment, obviously transportation costs, submitting to festivals was could be expensive. I didn't submit to that many film festivals. I would say one tip I have for that is to email. This was a tip I got from another filmmaker, was to email the festivals and be like, hey, like, this, I'm a production team of one. I don't have that many means. Are there any fee waivers? So I was able to benefit for some fee waivers, either able to submit for free or for a discounted rate. So that was one way. Other things that were cost money, obviously, was creating the poster and some of the marketing materials. I was able to have two Nigerian women, I'm Nigerian, design two different posters for me, which was really great. It was nice to be able to like work with other Black women in this endeavor. And so in terms of tips, so as I mentioned, I was able to get funding through Brown. I was able to get like a summer research grant. I was also able to get a couple, like there's like the Brown Arts Initiative has grants as well. So if you're currently linked to an institution, you can take a look to see what things they have to offer. I'd also caution one because some institutions, if in their fine print, say they have some rights to your intellectual property. So the institution that I'm at now, they're very much more about that. So I've been careful in trying to navigate, future projects.
Yeah.
And, again, I know that you guys, Black women photographers, has a grant as well. So very much plugging that. I have that bookmarked for future stuff as well to apply for. So yeah, I think those are just some of the tips. I think starting, I was very much like, you know, all of these films cost so much money. I think like the average cost for like a documentary for 1 minute is like $1,000 per minute or something like that.
Yeah.
But it is possible to not spend that much. Again, I'm not saying like my film isn't like Sundance worthy, right? But I think people still were able to connect. People were still able to connect with that. I was still able to get pretty high quality footage, which has been great. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I feel that like, there's an era of our journey where we can still make quality work with a small budget. And I'm so glad you provided those resources because shout out to all the previous Black women photographer grant winners. It's things like this that you can help or not help, but you can find money to help you create the project that you want to create. But you also mentioned the promotional materials, which I was thinking about too. Could you tell us what the process for creating those types of promotional materials for your film is like? Did you find those women? Did they find you? And then what kind of planning goes into that?
Yeah, so I didn't have like a really strong marketing plan or anything like that. I currently, I guess, identify as a social media entrepreneur, but at that time, I wasn't necessarily as much in social media. I didn't have that much marketing experience. But one of the women, her name is Angela Coker. Angela Coker, sorry, I just made it sound like Angela. It's Angela. So she does a lot of illustration. And I think I came across her work. I forgot exactly how. But I just messaged her on Instagram and then we were able to work together and she created the first mock-up. And then the second woman who designed the poster that I currently use, she was a dental student at the time. She's a dentist. And I saw her work through a friend of mine who is a dentist as well. And so I reached out to her and she was able to create this film poster, which has been great. So again, I feel like I've been very blessed through this process. Like, obviously we went through a couple different mock-ups and stuff to get this final result, but it was not an arduous process at all because I was, again, working with really talented folks. And then in terms of just like other promotional stuff, I haven't been as great as getting the word out as I can, partially because, I'm in residency. And so, I don't want a situation where, so many people are asking me to do screenings, et cetera, and I can't necessarily keep up. And so I haven't been as like proactive as I could be. But I've also been a bit intentional about that. And then this past April, we did the premiere with the Center for Black Maternal Health and Reproductive Justice at Tufts University, which was really great. It took me a while to actually premiere the film because I was looking for the quote unquote perfect opportunity and perfect venue to do so. And so I was comfortable with just waiting for the right opportunity, right? So the film was actually fairly done in 2022. But going through my first year of residency last year, I was in no place to be able to do a premiere. But this year it worked out really well, and it was in line with their Black Maternal Health Conference. So we were able to get a lot of people who were there for the conference to also view the film. So I'm really happy about how things have turned out. And now over this next year, I'm doing, private screenings for universities, different organizations, schools, and it's been really great so far. And then actually this past maybe 2 weeks ago, I was at the National Institutes of Health, showcasing the film to one of their groups. So that was great.
That is so incredible. And right now we just have our host reconnecting. So I'll just continue the flow at Black Women Photographers team. You know, I mean, I can't even imagine like how, again, like everything of like this nature feels for you to have this out in the world. What did it feel like when you were ready to release this film out in the world? And actually, first a second, how did you even like know you were done with the film? Like the project was done and ready to be put out in the world?
Yeah, because I love that question because you could just continue editing. Like you could just continue if you're able to edit, like
Forever.
continue just cutting things, moving things around, right? So you could just never be done. I don't feel like I had a moment where I was like, this is it. I think I was just like, all right, I got to put this out there. I was very happy with the results. And I had done a lot of screenings so the film was broken up into like 4 different chapters. So I had done a lot of screenings of like some of the individual chapters. And so I think getting feedback from what people felt from the first, like those individual chapters was really helpful, because I was like, okay, like this is making sense to people. People are connecting with this. People aren't confused. And so in merging them all together, I think that was really helpful in being like, okay, I think we're ready. And then I think you had asked another question, but I'm blanking on that.
Yeah, so like how has it been like for you to feel, how did you feel now that it is out in the world?
I think I feel good. I think that it's really created like necessarily conversations in various arenas. Again, institutions, grassroots organizations. Those have been like the really fulfilling ones for me. Um, and then more recently, I was able to connect with this Black OBGYN in Harrisburg. Her name is Dr. Toya Wright, and she's an art collector as well as her husband. She owns the Wright Collection. And she invited me to screen the documentary for people in her OBGYN department. And, it was just really great because her house is just like this beautiful art gallery of Black art. And like, these are just opportunities that, I wouldn't even think were possible. And so it's definitely opened a lot of doors for me, and then also the women in the film as well. So I feel good about it. I think, there's still a lot of different screenings coming up, and I definitely want to get the word more out there. I've kind of just been hedging a little bit because I'm also like full-time working, and that can be kind of overwhelming at times.
I can only imagine. And real quick before I turn it back to Chrissy, you did mention that you had like peers, a mentor, reviewing, giving feedback. How much of that did you take into consideration while also, maintaining your creative vision for your film? Like, at what point do you like draw the line of like, no, 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 this was an artistic choice?
Hmm. Yeah, I think for me, it was really just, did I feel that like that would be right for me in the film? So, she didn't even give me like, she would give me like smaller feedback, like, sounds a bit too harsh here, or, things like that. One thing that she did suggest that at first I didn't want to do, but I wound up doing, was including statistics, like disparity, like statistics of various health disparities impacting Black women. The reason why I didn't necessarily want to initially was because I feel like those disparities are kind of tossed around a lot. Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth, right? And it's like, okay, we hear that, but first of all, it's like, okay, we're not necessarily talking as much as what can be done for those disparities, et cetera. And so that's kind of why I wanted to avoid that initially. But I decided to, include some of those statistics because, again, like not everyone watching the film will actually be aware of those statistics. So, it can just give voice to why this is very important and why people should be tuning in and aware of these issues. So that's one of the things that I initially was like not necessarily super into, but wound up incorporating. And I'm happy that I did. So I think it really should just feel right and authentic to you, as cliche as that sounds. But for me, it was just like, okay, let's see. And I think it's also important to, listen to the feedback, maybe even try it out. Like maybe if they suggest like edit it this way, maybe just like create another project, edit it and see what you think. Because I'm a visual person. So trying it out might actually, bode like results like, oh, I actually like this better, rather than just like hearing the feedback. So yeah, that's kind of how I navigated that with my film.
Thank you so much for that and your patience in the middle of my technical
Oh,
difficulty.
no worries.
I wish I even knew what happened, but shout out to Polly, the seamless tag team.
Yes, that was very seamless.
Since we're on this subject, I'm really curious. Like we talked about, or it sounded like you were mentioning the Black maternity crisis while you were speaking. Um, do you see yourself like making follow-up films about this subject matter?
Yes, so creating this film, there were certain narratives that I wanted to portray. And I was able to do the majority of them. I knew I wanted to portray the narrative of someone who had gone through infertility while not having health insurance, because that is something that's just not talked about at all. For those of you who don't know, in vitro fertilization or IVF, the average cost of one cycle is between $10,000 and $15,000 without insurance. And even if people do have insurance, it's not necessarily fully covered. And so I wanted to highlight that experience because, again, going through infertility is very challenging. But then again, going through infertility while not necessarily having health insurance or means can be all the more challenging, right? And so I definitely wanted to give voice to that. I also wanted to highlight a Black birthing person's experience navigating postpartum mood and anxiety disorders. Currently, statistics show that 1 in 7 women experience postpartum depression, but I do think that those statistics are much higher. It's just people don't necessarily talk about it.
Right.
So those were some of the things I was able to showcase in my film because of the women in my film had those experiences. An experience that I was not able to highlight this time around was the subject of infant loss. People talk about miscarriages, but what is it to have a stillbirth? Like, what is it like for someone to have a stillbirth? I think that's not necessarily talked about, or just an early infant loss. I had actually met somebody who unfortunately had gone through that experience, but we were not able to necessarily, have that aligned for this film. So that's a subject matter that I'm interested in tackling in the future. So I think, Black birth is something that I'm very interested in, but I'm also interested in other topics as well, such as people's experience with sickle cell disease. Because again, like as someone who works in the emergency department, we do see a lot of patients with sickle cell disease. Unfortunately, they can be a very stigmatized population in healthcare due to their chronic pain, and they're often undertreated for their pain. So that's another subject matter that I'm interested in. So we shall see what the future holds.
Well, I mean, thinking about that, like these topics are so sensitive in both of your career trajectories. You are talking to people about some of the hardest things that they might go through in life. How do you take care of yourself after you come home from a day like that?
Yeah, I could do a lot better job of that. Um,
Appreciate the honesty.
yeah, I don't have like a ritual or self-care routine, to be honest with you. Probably should. But I think for me, number one, I'm in therapy, and I've been in therapy for like 3 years or so. Very, very important, very much like jazz. I got into therapy around like 2021 or so. And I have a great therapist. She's a Nigerian woman. She's a Christian. So we very much align on different things. And so having someone to talk to on a bi-weekly basis is very important. For me, I compartmentalize a lot, which is not the healthiest coping mechanism, to be honest with you. But it's just something that I do to survive. Because again, like especially this past month, working in the emergency department, working in West Philadelphia, there's a lot of gun violence. So, there were multiple days where I saw at least one gunshot victim per day. But I kind of had to like dissociate a little bit, which I think most people in medical professions just wind up doing. And so I think like taking those skills and then also interacting with these harder topics when it comes to media, I kind of do the same thing. But one has to be careful, right? Because you still want to be an empathetic person, right? You still want to actually connect with them on a human level, but you also do need to protect yourself. So I think like just being in therapy, also having friends who are also my co-residents, who I have a lot of Black women co-residents, which is great and kind of unheard of. It's been really nice to like decompress like with these really hard things that we see by nature of the work that we do.
Yeah, I'm really glad you have that. And that just makes me want to shout out therapyforblackgirls.com. Shout out to Dr. Joy. We love her over here.
Yeah, that's
And
how I found my therapist, Therapy for Black Girls.
oh yes, we love to see it.
Yeah.
And yeah, thinking about that, then it almost sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that your filmmaking is also kind of maybe like an outlet. Like I can imagine this is a bit of a therapy session for you too, where it's just like you get to talk about the things that are important to you that are also in a lot of ways heartbreaking.
100%. I do find that film, I haven't necessarily been able to do as much film in residency, but I've mainly been able to do writing, haven't done as much photography, but those outlets in different parts of my life have been really important in just keeping me going. I think that's why I struggled a lot during my first year of residency, intern year, which is typically like one of the hardest years of residency, is because I just didn't have the time to do that health equity work that I feel like drives my passions and goals. So I was feeling very unfulfilled, just like in various aspects of my life, especially my work life. But I'm really grateful that this past year in residency, I went through a period like January through April where I just was on more chill rotations. And that's when I had the premiere and I was able to like do various speaking events. I was like, okay, this is the stuff that really keeps me going. I feel like I'm truly living my purpose when I'm doing those things. Not to say I don't feel like I'm living out my purpose like on the day to day in the emergency department, but I just feel like a different type of drive when I'm doing those things.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes me think about this confidence that I feel like you exude. I feel like it's just coming off of you. And I imagine that like committing to this work and feeling like you're aligned with your purpose helps and adds to that confidence. How did you build it over time with this practice? And if you have any advice for the people that are experiencing maybe some imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I grew up a very shy person. I grew up in very white environments. My parents are immigrants from Nigeria, and they very much were focused on education, as I think a lot of children of immigrants can relate to. And so they put me through private school throughout my life, which I'm very grateful for. But by nature, I was exposed to a lot of white people, and so I felt very much like not comfortable in my skin, not attractive, like all of those things. I went to a New England boarding school for high school, which again, I got a lot of resources, a lot of opportunities, but again, it really did a number on my self-confidence. So I think that, transitioning into undergrad, so I was at Brown University, very much a socially conscious environment. I think that was very helpful in just like truly feeling accepted as a Black woman, as a dark-skinned Black woman in this space. And so I was able to, I think, really build that confidence in undergrad. And then transitioning into medical school, I feel like I was able to build more confidence in the craft of, documentary film, photography, et cetera. And I think also just hearing people's feedback again, seeing the conversations that this film has generated, and seeing that it served as an educational tool in some ways in very various venues, I think has again solidified my confidence in like, I think this is something that I'm supposed to do. I think this is what God has put me on earth to do, which I'm very grateful for because not everyone has that. And so I think in terms of advice, I think just being like aware of your surroundings and your environment. And if you feel like the environment that you're in isn't serving you, and you have the ability to transition to another environment where you're more valued, I think that definitely do that. But however, that can be challenging because I feel like a lot of people are in jobs where they're not valued and you can't just necessarily pick up and leave a job because, bread needs to be on the table, right? And so I think just like, if it's the job and you can't necessarily leave, I think again, like trying to build that community that really pours into you, I think is very important. But again, that's also challenging, right? And so for me, I think prayer, I'm a woman of faith, so I think prayer has definitely helped build that confidence in myself for sure. Because again, like if I reflect on being like a 5 to like 12-year-old and like if I was that age and saw what I was doing now, like I wouldn't have believed you because, just like speaking to people was just I was just so insecure that I was like, didn't even want to like speak to people. So,
Oh.
yeah, so I don't know. I feel just like grateful that I'm like in this space now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm very happy for you too. It's like I said, it's just illuminating off of you.
Yeah.
But on that note of like being in these very white dominated spaces, the film industry is also a very white male dominated space.
Mhm.
What lessons have you learned so far in these spaces, and how do you get people to respect you and respect your ideas and value your time?
Yeah, so I don't come from a formal film background at all. Like I didn't study film in college. And so I think there are benefits to that because again, like I feel like I bypassed a lot of like that exposure. Like I don't really have like a strong like film community. Because again, I just kind of did this myself. So obviously like pros and cons to that. And so I don't feel that I had necessarily as much imposter syndrome from like, oh, I'm a Black woman doing this. I think I had some imposter syndrome as like, oh, I actually don't have any formal film background. and I'm doing this. So I think that, that wasn't necessarily a thing for me. But I think, again, like, I love that this space exists, that Black women photographers exist, because again, it's so inspiring just to see like all of the work that, women in this space are doing. So again, like aligning oneself to a space like this and other spaces that are similar, I think are really important in building that confidence and, feeling that you're not alone in this space for sure. And I think that, yeah, again, I haven't been like, I've done some festivals here and there, but I haven't necessarily, been in the film festival circuit like that. But again, I feel like I've gotten, pretty good responses from, various groups of people in this, which has been great. So I think, again, building that community, and then just, prioritizing the spaces that do accept you, I think is important, because again, like the more you try to chase the environments and the spaces that just, again, don't see your value, the worse you're going to feel. So I think that's something that I learned in high school, being like, okay, well, there's this group of people who don't necessarily like value me as a person. I'm not going to try to prove my value to them. I'm just going to like go to another group that actually values me. So yeah.
I think it's a really good reminder that you don't come from a film background, you didn't go to film school. So you are a clear example of someone who can still learn how to articulate their work. Do you have advice for like budding photographers or filmmakers on how to get to the point where they're able to articulate what they want to do, maybe for a pitch or, something like that?
Mhm. For me, I think looking at other people's work was really helpful. So I actually really like watching documentaries. That's like my preferred genre of things to watch. And so I think for me, just like watching a lot growing up and just seeing like how interviews are filmed and how B-roll goes over interviews and stuff like that. So I think that's what made the process of making this film a bit more natural. And it's not like it felt like painstaking and trying to edit. So I think like watching what other people do in film and photography is really important. Would be my main thing. And then in terms of like getting your work out there, I think, again, as cliche as it sounds, it's just like truly shoot your shot, right? Because as I mentioned, no formal film background, no formal journalism background, but by the grace of God, I was able to create this film. I've been able to publish in the places we discussed, without that background. So I think I've heard, a lot of people being like, I want to do this, but I don't have this background. But again, like there's so many people that have, jumped hoops and ladders, some by nepotism, some by, connections, but some by favor and just like putting yourself out there. And so, I think that that's just one thing, and don't think that something is too big to attain. So for me, again, I like have my vision board every year. I have pictures of like the places that I want to publish. Teen Vogue was on there, Huffington Post was on there. 2021 didn't publish in Huffington Post. 2022 I didn't. 2023 I didn't. But 2024 I did, right? And so if it doesn't happen this year, it could happen next year. So keeping that faith there, and just always like focusing on those goals, I think, again, is really important. And then also just making space for like life to surprise you, because there's just like some experiences that I've been able to experience that I couldn't even like think about. Like I just didn't even think that this is possible. So that's kind of my advice in that
Yeah.
matter.
Those are always some of my favorite experiences where it's like I got all this stuff on my vision board or my goals list, and there are always other little gems and sweet little experiences that come from manifesting what you want. You're like, oh, I didn't even know this was a part of the goal, but now that I'm here and I'm in it, yeah, I just achieved that.
Yeah, exactly. I will say like this past, what was it, April, I was blessed enough to receive like recognition from the Celtics for my documentary. That was something that I didn't even think a basketball team would care about. You know what I mean? I didn't think they would care about it. But I was able to like be spotlighted at one of their games, and that was really great. So that's just like an example of something that was not even on my vision board. I didn't even write that down, but the Lord wanted to surprise me. So yeah.
See, that's beautiful. And I also saw you were the recipient of the 2022 National Minority Quality Forum 40 Under 40 Leader in Health Award. Come on.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
you're gaining the accolades. We love to see it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, I got that in my last year of medical school, which is super exciting. And yeah, I think the work that they do is really important. And I think it was really great because I was able to network with a lot of other people in the health equity space. Some people I still keep in touch with to this day. Yeah.
Nice. I want to take it back a little step and talk about producing again, because you've been producing since you were a teenager. Um, do you have any advice on how to produce a film? And can you be like a little specific, like maybe what programs you use, what resources you used in order to really flush out everything and know your budget and all that?
Mhm. For me, when I started off doing research, which everyone should do. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a year's worth of research, but for me, I wanted to see what films are out there talking about this topic. Okay, there are films that exist, but how can I do this differently? How can I make mine stand out? How can I make it that I'm not reinventing the wheel? For this topic of Black maternal health, that wasn't necessarily hard to do because there were not that many films at the time talking about those things. Now we have more, we have Aftershock, et cetera, but at the time there really weren't. And then when we're talking about infertility and postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, there were really no films about that at all. Like at the time, the only films that were talking about that were focused on the narratives of white women. And so I knew that my film was needed. So doing that research, kind of doing a needs assessment, we talk about that in public health research, like doing a needs assessment, like, is this needed? The answer is yes. Excuse me. And the answer is typically yes, right? And so after that, it was very much recruiting for my film. And, I met one of the women, Shailene, at in an activist space in Providence. So I very much suggest getting involved with your community. I wasn't necessarily as involved in the Providence like birthing community as I would have liked, just because COVID and just like being in medical school. But I was able to at least show up to some events and build those connections. And then also like keeping the lookout and your ears out for people that you already know. So I mentioned that I used to take photos for Dr. Ijo McCullough's Instagram blog. And she had made a post about her experience navigating infertility. And so I reached out to her being like, hey, do you want to be a part of this film? And she said yes. And then I mentioned I was connected to another woman through an OBGYN mentor at the time. I was going to go into obstetrics and gynecology, but I switched, which is another story for another day. So that's kind of like my advice with recruiting is, again, getting involved in your community. Social media is a great way as well. And then just, paying attention to the people who are already in your life. And then in terms of actual production, being organized. So you don't want to forget your lavalier bike at home because you're going to be upset. You want to make sure that your camera batteries, you have at least one or two backups. You want to make sure that you have backup memory cards as soon as you get home. So my camera doesn't have like the two memory card thing where it's like you can like put the footage on both as a backup. So as soon as I got home, I was disciplined. I did my data dump, put it on my external hard drive, and then uploaded it on Google Drive because I could not afford to lose any data. Because my film was in 4 different chapters, it made editing easier because I was focused on a chapter at a time. So, I would just edit as things would go. There was one program that I used. Let me figure out the name.
Yeah.
It is amazing because, let's see, what is it called? I'll figure it out. But it's joins your audio and your video together. So if you like externally record your audio, which most people do, it will basically do its algorithm and just like fuse the files together. So you don't have to like try to line up the audio and the video. And I thought I would have had to do that, which would have taken too darn long. So that has been amazing. That was just really amazing. And then, yeah, so that's like, those are the things that just like made my editing process smooth. I would transcribe my interviews, which is pretty standard. And I would come up with a loose script. So once my interview was done, I would film interviews only on like one day. And then I would come up with a loose script of how I think the story should go. And then I would think about B-roll that I would want over it so that when it's time to film B-roll, like I already know what I want to do. So it's not like after the fact, I'm like, dang, I wish I got a shot of this person doing this. So, if you want to be super organized, you can create a shot list. I didn't do that as formally, but I think that was really helpful and just like bringing the visuals through.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my process, I would say. And trying to think of anything else that was helpful. I'm personally a Final Cut Pro girl. I know a lot of people do the Adobe one. I just was not really interested in learning a new program. But Final Cut Pro has been great.
Good. Yeah. That just makes me think about like the different stages of production and how you're wearing a lot of hats. I mean, you were the audio engineer, the digitech, the filmmaker.
Uh-huh.
Um, and thank you for giving us the background of producing. When you get to the point where like you find your models, and you're recruiting them and you're scheduling these dates, in photography, we use a lot of model releases and contracts. What do you need in place for film, and what does that look like for you?
Very similar. Like I had a standard release that I had gotten from the internet and then just like tweaked it. I made sure like before filming, I met with each and every one of them one-on-one to just explain like this is, the film and this is why I want to do this. I'm thinking about focusing on these things that I learned about you in the film. Are you okay with that? And then also I give people space to back out whenever they want, because at the end of the day, these are their stories. So I want them to feel like they have the agency in sharing their stories. So that's a very big thing for me as a creative, that features other people, that showcases other people's experiences, is doing my best to make sure that their agency is preserved throughout the process. And so I very much had those like initial meetings, and then I would send over the release before filming was done. And it really hasn't been a problem since. Another thing that I kind of learned about later was that, if you film in particular public spaces, you need like a location release. I'm not using the right terminology, but you need to be careful about that, because you could get into trouble if you don't have like formal permission. Like a lot of hospitals, they have their own media rules. And so I had to look into that. I didn't do too much filming in the hospital because of that. But one of the hospitals that I filmed at, I, after the fact, looked at their media rules, and luckily it aligned. But, that could have been an issue too. So that was something that I should have known about that I didn't. And I probably would have learned if I had like formal filmmaking experience. But that's just like another tip to think about, is location releases.
Yeah, that's super important, especially when doing healthcare work. I mean, you have to follow so many rules. I imagine you also probably have to follow HIPAA, right?
100%.
Right.
So for me, now that I'm a practicing physician, I don't, if I meet a patient and they happen to have something that I want to talk about, I don't ever ask them, because it's just, for me, it's just a conflict of interest for me. I could always have them sign a HIPAA release form, but I just feel uncomfortable that I care for them in the capacity of a physician. And then now, like, it just kind of gets blurry. So I kind of avoid that. Um, so I think for my written pieces, I don't have people sign a release, and maybe I should actually start doing that. I have like more verbal consent, and that's typically all you need for written. But yes, for patient experiences, it can get more challenging. I know for like these big institutions, they have people that they feature patients, they have people sign a HIPAA release form. And I actually, the most recent story, she signed a HIPAA release form because she was photographed at like the hospital and stuff. Um, yeah, those are some of the things that
Yeah, it's very important depending on where you are to make sure you guys get your permits, and knowing the protocol and how to operate when you're documenting people in different spaces.
Mhm.
Um, we are coming to a close, but before we go, I wanted to wrap up on a high note. I want to know something you're super excited about. Maybe if you have something coming up, or maybe Black motherhood, through the lens, is getting another feature somewhere. Maybe that's on Sundance. You know what I'm saying? What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, so I don't have too many screenings coming up. It can be challenging just again navigating this through a residency schedule. I will say the things that I'm looking forward to in the near future are some travels. I have a solo trip planned, going to the Olympics in August, which is a new development. Yeah, so I'm excited for those things. I feel like I really need to rest. I feel like I've kind of just been running around for the past like 6 years or so. So I'm hoping that this next couple of months I'm do a little bit of a break, a little bit of recharge, and kind of go from there. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, I love that. And shout out to you for not letting anyone dim your light. As women, as Black women, we are often told to stay humble or like know our place. And I feel like you're such a great example of someone who just continues to go for what they want and what they like envision the world to be like and feel like. And I feel very honored talking to you today. Thank you so much for sharing space and letting us in on your life and your creative journey. Like, I feel so grateful for this moment.
Thank you so much. It's been really great to, connect with you all. The work that you do is so inspiring. So, keep doing the work and keep inspiring us all.
Yes, thank you so much. And as we close, I just want to say again, shout out to our sponsors, Adobe Photoshop Lightroom. This is just day 2. We have one more day of this summit. We're so excited. Tomorrow we'll be speaking to 4 more guests. So please make sure you come back. If you missed anything, all of these are recorded for you, so you can watch it at any time, especially, you had to take a break in the middle or something like that. And then another little reminder, in case you missed it earlier, Black women photographers will be hosting another Q&A series very soon with the 2024 Lightroom ambassadors. So be on the lookout for that. Plus, our birthday is coming up. Like, it's a lot of things happening right now. But yes, thank you so much for a beautiful day 2 of the Black Women Photographers Summit. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Wait. Can I take a screenshot? Okay, cool. So we can take a picture. Okay. Gee. Perfect. Okay, see you guys tomorrow for real now.
Bye. Have a great day. Thank you.